Welcome to One Chapter, One Thought. I'm Pastor Chris from Lincroft Bible Church in New Jersey, and every weekday I read one chapter of the Bible and offer one brief devotional thought. Today's reading is from the book of Genesis, chapter 2. So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God has finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. This is the account of the creation of the heavens and earth. When the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, neither wild plants nor grains were growing on the earth, for the Lord God had not yet sent rain to water the earth, and there were no people to cultivate the soil. Instead, springs came up from the ground and watered all the land. Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. Then the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he placed the man he had made. The Lord God made all sorts of trees to grow up from the ground, trees that were beautiful and produced delicious fruit. In the middle of the garden he placed the tree of life, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river flowed from the land of Eden, watering the garden and dividing it into 4 branches. The first branch, called the Pishon, flowed around the entire land of Havilah, where gold is found. The gold of that land is exceptionally pure. Aromatic resin and onyx stone are also found there. The second branch, called the Gihon, flowed around the entire land of Cush. The third branch, called the Tigris, flowed east of the land of Ashur, and the fourth branch is called the Euphrates. The Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it. But the Lord God warned him, "You may freely eat the fruit of every tree in the garden, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you eat its fruit, you are sure to die." Then the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper who is just right for him." So the Lord God formed from the ground all the wild animals and all the birds of the sky. He brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And the man chose a name for each one. He gave names to all the livestock, all the birds of the sky, and all the wild animals. But still, there was no helper just right for him. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. While the man slept, the Lord God took out one of the man's ribs and closed up the opening. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib, and he brought her to the man. "At last," the man exclaimed, "this one is bone of my bone and flesh from my flesh. She will be called woman because she was taken from man." This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Now, the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. One thought. Genesis chapter 2 provides a zoomed-in account of the creation of day 6 when humanity was made. God creates the first man, Adam, out of the ground, breathes in him the breath of life, and then places him in a garden in Eden. Now, it's important to recognize there's actually 3 places that are being talked about in this chapter. There is the garden itself, but Eden is a wider region in which the garden was placed, and then there is the rest of the world. There's kind of these 3 zones, so to speak. And when God puts the man in this garden, he gives the man a job. He places the man in the garden to tend it and watch over it. And on one level, Adam's job was to certainly be a good caretaker, a good gardener within the garden. But there's also indicators in the text that something deeper is going on here. These words, to tend and watch over it, are words that are picked up later to describe the work of the priests in the temple. For example, in Numbers 3, 7, and 8, and 1 Chronicles 23, 32, this working and serving in the temple is the words used here to describe Adam's work. And also, again, as I mentioned, there were these 3 zones, right? And it's likely that Israel's temple was patterned after the Garden of Eden. In the creation narrative, there is the garden where God and man, they meet. Chapter 3 talks about how God would walk in the garden in the cool of the day, a metaphor for God's presence being there. But then there's Eden and the rest of the world. And I think this three-part structure is reflected in the three-part structure of the temple. The temple had the outer court, which represented the rest of the world. There was the holy place, which I think represents Eden, and then the very inner sanctum, the garden, was represented by the Holy of Holies. So what? Putting all these pieces together, we have Adam with this priestly-like function, working in this temple-like environment. What does this all mean? Well, I think it is an indicator that life is fundamentally about worship. Adam was called to live before the face of God or in the presence of God continually. While Adam certainly did normal and ordinary things like gardening, it was to be done all for the glory of God, in the presence of God. And I think that principle still applies to us as believers, that our life is fundamentally about worshiping God, whether in the ordinary or whether in church. Wherever we find ourselves, we are to give him glory. And then this text also, I think, anticipates the new creation. Because the Bible at the very end talks about a new creation, but there will actually be no temple in the new creation. There will be no sun in the new creation, because the glory of God will shine like the sun and his presence will be everywhere. In other words, the whole world will be his temple. And that is the day that we look forward to. That is where the whole story is going. Not that we're just brought back to the garden, but that God is going to even renew and renovate, kind of have the garden on steroids, so to speak, an even better existence than we could ever imagine being back in the garden, because we will never have the option to sin in the new creation and will be with the Lord forever. And it's all because of what Jesus has done for us.